And
And now, Velma, you can provide our opening remarks.
Good evening to everyone here this evening. It is such a joy to be with each one of you who have come to celebrate and pay tribute to a very important person at this event on March 11th, 2021. So it's such a privilege to have done these tributes over these many years. Actually, it's 38 years we have come together as a tribute to our profession and a social work hero, we can call tonight. So it has been such a joy to have a conversation with so many of you who have come tonight. And the special evening really is that the World Community of Social Workers has been in partnership with the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work. And before we introduce the dean, I'd just like to pretend really that Whitney Young is with us right now, because I have a message that he delivered May 24th, 1967. It was the 94th Forum for the National Association of Social Welfare. And this is what Whitney Young said from his platform. Social work was born in an atmosphere of righteous indignation, of divine discontent. In our zeal to become professional, the urgency of the challenge was lost. We lost or rejected the crusader label. Now, if there ever was a time, it is the time now for the crusader. So it's such a privilege tonight to be with the World Community of Social Workers and all of you who are with us, and a pleasure now to bring to you Honorable Dr. Jeannie Jones, the Dean of the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work, to bring you welcome in her own remarks. Dean Jones, will you come forth?
Thank you very much, Ms. Banks. Good evening, everyone. I am honored to be a part of the 38th Annual Lecture Tribute to Mr. Whitney M. Young, Jr. I have the pleasure, the honor the privilege to serve as the 13th sitting dean in the school. And I want to share a little bit with you tonight about Mr. Young and his influence in the School of Social Work. Mr. Young served as Dean of the School of Social Work from 1954 to 1961. In October 2000, at the school's 80th anniversary, under the presidency of Dr. Thomas W. Cole Jr. and the deanship of Dorcas D. Bowles, the name of the School of Social Work was changed from Clark Atlanta University School of Social Work to Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work. Because of Mr. Young's long history at the Urban League on Social Justice and Equality, President Cole stated that he wanted the faculty to ensure that students understood issues related to clients who are marginalized or disenfranchised, and how to combat racism and oppression, gender inequality, and discrimination wherever they saw it. Mr. Young understood that Atlanta University School of Social Work would ensure that all students were given the knowledge, skills, and values that would allow them to work with oppressed, marginalized individuals and groups, no matter their culture, race, education, or socioeconomic status. He made sure that the curricula at Atlanta University School of Social Work included content on social justice issues in practice, human behavior, policy, and that these students focus on areas to add to the body of knowledge for schools of social work throughout the country. He also understood that economic justice was evident in low wages, job discrimination, a lack of job training, and high unemployment in certain communities, especially communities of color. He wanted professors to teach students how to advocate for policies and reduce poverty and increase educational and employment opportunities in communities plagued by poverty, and how to work with clients to give them needed skills to fight to reduce poverty and increase educational and employment opportunities in their communities. Mr. Young encouraged faculty to have their students do master's theses on issues impacting communities of color to add to the body of knowledge on behalf of these vulnerable populations. Summarily, Mr. Young, as Dean of the School of Social Work, wanted professors to teach students not to simply talk about societal ills, but to work themselves and their clients to create a new and better society. I am so pleased to continue that legacy as the Dean of the school, and I want to welcome you again to the 38th Annual Tribute on behalf of Mr. Whitney M. Young. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. You have really been an asset for us moving forward at this tribute this year. Again, we're so thankful for those who have joined us. Of course, this is Velma Banks, President of the World Community of Social Workers, and we'll give you just a little highlight. Some of you have been with us at all of the tributes. Some of you have been to some of them. Some of you have attended them at the National Black Theater, 125th Street and Fifth Avenue. Some have come to the Abyssinia Baptist Church. Some have come to Columbia University at 116th Street and Broadway. Some of you have come to the Grand Piazza restaurant, where I think we'll have a picture to show where we made a tribute to someone who had made a contribution. One of the things that we have done as a part of being pleased to be keeping the legacy of Whitney Young alive, this is what it's really all about. So the World Community of Social Workers was formed in 1992 with one mission, really, was to keep the legacy and spirit of Whitney Young alive. And we've done that in different kinds of ways. And on the screen here, I'll just share with you that at the Grand Piazza, where we had one of our tributes, we made a special contribution at that night and gave Honorable Congressman Towns, who is a social worker, an award for his contribution. And standing next to him is Marsha Contarella, the daughter of Whitney Young. So we were glad she was with us that night. And since we are looking at this screen and these pictures right now, let me just share with you that the founding members, or standing there, one is Dr. Laura Perez Hester, Honorable Betty Williams, and of course next to her is Dr. Marsha Contarella, and of course that's Honorable Congressman Towns, who is now doing other things. He's not a congressman at the moment, but he's doing wonderful things on behalf of Whitney Young and Joy Height with the new approach social work. Of course, that's Alma Banks standing there. And one of the founders is Sidney Mochette. Sidney Mochette was the director of Reality House, a major program for those who were dependent other than themselves, their substances. So glad of that picture. Now, the other one we see here is the last one that we were on the premise. This was at Amy Ruth's restaurant at 116th Street off Lenox Avenue. That was the last time we were able to do on night. And there are many people in there you recognize, but just for you to see what we've done in the middle of our trip and also in. Some of you have come to those tributes at different locations, some never come, but tonight all together in a virtual understanding that we can see each other who have come from all over the city and the state. Connecticut people have come, Manhattan, New York people have come. Texas people have come. And we're so glad that each of you have come to be with us tonight. I do want to also say that one of the things that the World Community of Social Workers did, which was very special, Whitney Young introduced a 10-point domestic Marshall Plan, and it's included in his To Be Equal book. And what we did was to present each one of those 10 points in a series of workshops. And we were blessed in order to do that by a grant from the Honorable C. Virginia Fields, a social worker who was at that time the president, Manhattan Borough President of New York City. So we think she may be with us tonight, and I hope she is, but I really do thank her. And she has been one of our honorees at the tribute. So what you're knowing tonight is that the World Community of Social Workers have been carrying forth our mission to acknowledge the work that Whitney Young has done for equal justice and for all people to have a better life economically, socially, educationally. So that's the purpose of our being here tonight, to say Whitney Young was a social work pioneer, still is a social work pioneer, and we are so glad about it all. So there's so much more you can find out about the World Community of Social Workers, and perhaps before tonight we'll learn even more. So the members, some are here, we're glad they are. Some of them are deceased now. Bob Knox, who was of the Association of Black Social Workers, is not with us anymore. Preston Wilcox, who was a major contributor to social work, is not with us anymore. A young lady by the name of Marie Green, who's a graduate of NYU School of Social Work, is not with us tonight. She has made her transition. So while we have done other tributes, and they have been what we call fabulous, we also, as a part of the social work community, provided scholarship aid to students who attended the Whitney Young School of Social Work. So tonight, that's part of our highlight as the world community. And we're so pleased that we are in agreement with what's happening at the Duke School of Social Work. And very soon, we will be sharing with you the highlight for this tribute. And we are so thankful that we can bring to you an alumnus of the School of Social Work who has written this phenomenal book that you'll be hearing about. And not only did she write this book, she has written many books. She has authored many articles. She co-edited a book with Dr. James Dumpson, who was a commissioner of human resources in New York City. She has done something very special on behalf of the World Community of Social Workers by writing an article in our newsletter, 2007. And that was the year we chose to make Whitney Young the social worker of the century. So that article that was written for that newsletter puts that forth. So if you see any picture of Whitney Young, at the base of it should say social worker of the century. So we're so pleased that we could do that as a part of our legacy on behalf of his contribution. So we will bring to you just a little brief statement again about Dr. Alma Carten, who will be interviewed by another very popular alumnus of the Whitney School of Social Work. Johnny E. Parham was a student during Dean Young's deanship. He was an active student with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he was the first executive director of the Thurgood Marshall Fund. And one of his attributes is that he's a founding member of the World Community of Social Workers. And we were forming ourselves. We had our first meeting in his office at the United Negro College Fund, downtown New York. So we are again about to bring for your edification tonight, Dr. Alma Carten, who will identify herself by what she says and what she has said in her new book. And Brother Johnny Parham will bring it all to life. So I give you now, as we sit up, take notice for this interactive dialogue between Alma and Johnny. Are you ready? I hope so. We're about to bring him forward.
Okay. Well, this actually is a signal honor to again be with the World Community of Social Workers and to be in this arena with really the Dean of the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work and with the distinguished Dr. Alma Carten, who herself is an alumni of the School of Social Work. And one of my really burning questions to Alma is knowing that she really entered the School of Social Work not coming from the South. But I would be interested to know, Alma, your feelings when you arrived on the campus of Atlanta University to begin your studies for an MSW at the School of Social Work. What were your impressions? Can you reflect on some of those impressions that you still carry from that era?
Okay, honey, and let me, before I answer that, let me just thank Velma for her very enthusiastic introduction and also for keeping the World Community of Social Workers going for over 30 years. And I'm so happy to be here with this important meeting hosted by Dean Jones. So thank you all. I got a little bit nervous again. You asked me to reflect back and I have to go back a while on that. But, you know, as I remember coming to the school, I was born in Fort Valley, Georgia. I didn't grow up there. My family was a part of the Great Migration that left when I was about 2 years old. But I do have strong roots in the South. But when I came to the school, it was a totally different physical environment for me. And I was a little bit somewhat ill at ease, you know. It was totally a new environment for me. So I did feel some discomfort. I was still very young and away from home. And because it was so different for me, I was eager to get home, to get back home. So I could say for the first months, I was feeling pretty much ill at ease. But then after a while, I became to realize that I was in a very special place. And I would say that it was the first time I had only had one African-American teacher, and that was my kindergarten teacher, Miss Shook. I still remember her name because she was nice and soft and fluffy, and she'd make us all give her a giant hug when we came in to class or kindergarten. But so when I came to Atlanta University, it was the first time that I had been taught by African-American faculty. And it was the first time that I had felt valued, and I didn't feel I was never the only one in the classroom. And I often say now, Johnny, that had I not been educated at the School of Social Work, that I probably would not be sitting here today. That the people who taught me, like I was never taught by Whitney Young, but he did come back to the school because he would be a part of the master's thesis of students. And you could always tell when he had a great presence. So we always knew when he came to the school that he was there. And the students would say, the dean is here, the dean is here. And we always knew they were not talking about the sitting dean, that was Dean Jackson, that they were talking about Dean Young. And he did have an enormous presence, and his presence was felt in the school. I didn't have the fortunate, as you had the fortunate of being mentored by him or taught by him, but I was taught like Genevieve Hill, who served as dean. She taught me casework. Edith Ross taught me group work. And Edith Roth has published this wonderful book about social work, social service developments in the South that I used a lot in writing this book. There were just wonderful people that I was taught by who left an indelible mark on me as a social worker. And I do think that I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be sitting here if I had not had that education. It was Atlanta University when I was there. And I feel very, very grateful for it. They left an indelible mark on me as a professional social worker. I don't think I would have been, all of my work and my career has been towards social injustice. And I think that that's because of the experience that at the school. So I just feel proud to be an alum of the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work, now named Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work. But thank you for the question.
Well, as a person who arrived on campus and really derived the benefit of really those remarkable professors, did you ever think that you, as one of many students, would have authored the definitive history of the School of Social Work? Because that's where we are now. And frankly, I feel that you have indeed authored a definitive history of the School of Social Work that will last through the ages. I think that it will be a reference source, not only for students at the School of Social Work, but frankly, I think that for other schools, when they began to look at the history of social work. At the time when I was there, I think Whitney taught a class on social work history, and I'm sure Velma took that class. And basically, we used to many times kind of a joke without his knowing that he was a master on talking about the Elizabethan poor laws.
Oh my goodness, I love the Elizabethan poor laws.
Well, that was he had mastered the Elizabethan poor laws, and so whenever he, I guess, did not prepare for that particular day, he would go off on on the Elizabethan poor laws. But now I think that what's happened here, Alma, your book now has really provided a bridge from those Elizabethan poor laws to where we are today. And so, you're to be commended, and I think that we're all indebted to you for your remarkable work. And therefore, we'd like to ask you questions to bring to life those pages that you've labored over. You describe the history of the school while at the same time describing concurrent development in U.S. social welfare history, changes in CSWE accrediting policies, and the NASW Code of Ethics. Why was it important for you to contextualize the telling of the school's history in this way?
Okay, before I answer that question, Johnny, may I just say, because I just totally love the Elizabethan poor laws, and I'm happy to hear. I didn't know that about Whitney M. Young Jr., but when I was teaching, students got very tired of, their eyes would sort of glaze over when you would talk about the history, the poor law history. Our social welfare policies came pretty much from England. And what I would do, because I thought it was still important to teach them that history, I would just reverse it. I said, let's go to the 1996 Personal Responsibility and Welfare Reform, the Personal Responsibility and Work Reconciliation Act of 1996. It is a mirror reflection of the Elizabethan poor laws. So I just, I think part of the reason why I wanted to write the book was because I thought history was important, and because it was being diluted from our curriculum, because it wasn't that appealing to students. And I just felt it was important to, for students to learn the history if they were going to understand all of the conundrums of what we see in our social welfare policies today. Even if you take a little concept like less eligibility, and that meant that anybody who is supported at the public expense should not be paid at a higher rate than, should not have a stipend at a higher rate that's higher than that of the lowest paid worker. So it helps you to understand why we set our public assistance grant so low, not enough to help people get on their feet, but just to keep them in kind of a constant state of dependence. So you can see how I get off on the history of the Elizabethan poor laws. To get back to your question, I chose to do putting it in that kind of context for 3 reasons, and not for several reasons actually. And if you look at part 1 of the book, in beginnings, that establishes the historical context for the school, for the university, and for the school. And I began that first parts in those chapters talks about the colonial period in Georgia, the enslavement of Blacks, and Reconstruction. And as you all know, I'm sure everybody who's on this webinar knows that it was illegal to teach Blacks how to read or write during enslavement. So at the end of the Civil War and emancipation and Reconstruction, there were about 4,000 freed Blacks eager to have the education that Blacks have been denied for 4 centuries. And that was a good thing, but there was far more whites who were equally determined to keep education out of the reach of Blacks, at least education that was not beyond the basics, because whites were very happy with having Blacks have the basic or rudimentary education that will prepare them for servile positions, but they were not inclined for Blacks to be educated in the liberal arts, which Atlanta University was determined to do, because that level of education would prepare them to be the so-called equal of whites, and to have full citizenship. So we're not for Black enslavement or its legacy of Jim Crowism, legal segregation, and structural racism that got passed on. There would not be a need for a Whitney M. Young School of Social Work. There would not be a need for the Atlanta University School of Social Work. So I wanted to establish that broad context. And I did that knowing that we don't like to talk about slavery, but we're talking about it more now, I should say, but we need to understand that if we're gonna take some corrective actions about what we're facing today. So I also want to say that despite those limitations that Forrester B. Washington, I should say, those conditions under which Blacks were living in those early years, and that Forrester B. Washington referred to as a hostile environment when he talked about the school existing in the hostile environment. The school nonetheless was doing very positive things. And I would just say a few of those were that in the early years of the school, was just getting off its feet, just beginning to function as a school of social work. It provided quality social work services in the city of Atlanta for Blacks who did not have this access to those services because they were denied those services by the white agencies. And also moving forward, in the Depression years, Forrester B. Washington, and I hope people know this, Forrester B. Washington was a member of FDR's Black cabinet. He headed the Negro Bureau of FERA, the Federal Emergency Reconstruction Administration. Did I get that right? So, and he was at the federal level, and he was in that position while he was director of the School of Social Work. So he was advocating for Blacks at the federal level while he was a dean of social work. Even though these things he was kind of living in, the school was emerging in this hostile environment. And if we fast forward to If you tell me if I'm talking too much too.
Oh, no, no, this is enlightening.
If you fast forward to the 1970s, Atlanta University School of Social Work and Howard University School of Social Work joined together to develop this Afrocentric perspective and the Black perspective. And they were developing that as curriculum that should be included in all of the accredited schools of social work. So there were a number of things going on that, even though, as I said earlier, the school was in this sort of hostile environment, it was still being very productive and serving the Black community. And just let me say a few other reasons why I wanted to have this broader perspective is that social welfare systems, we don't like to think about it this way, but social welfare systems and our personal and our professional associations are as much blemished by racism as are our criminal justice system, education, healthcare system, our economic system. And although it may be painful for us to acknowledge this, because, you know, social work is premised in this concept of social justice, but it's important that we do this if we are to engage in a racial reckoning, to use the word that we're using today, within our own ranks. The other reason I wanted to take this broad perspective was that I didn't want to just report historical facts, you know? Some historical books, there's just like a linking of facts. But what I wanted to do was to put it into a context, because when you put the facts in context, and I'm always thinking as a professor, because that's what I've done, professor of social work, because that's what I've done for most of my professional career. It encourages critical thinking. And so if you can say that the Social Security Act and the GI Bill were two major pieces of legislation that thrust and created a path for white Americans into the middle class and the upper class. But those two major pieces of policy discriminated against Blacks. So if you can kind of put that in the context and explain that, it makes terms like these terms that today are very toxic, like systemic racism and white privilege. You know, like when I was teaching, students would get very upset when they would hear those terms. But when you can put it in context and you can show in facts how poverty and wealth are passed on for over generations. And so finally, I just wanted to also, and when you look at the book, you talk about it being documented. I relied heavily on the scholarship of Black scholars, because, not exclusively, because there were some white scholars who were writing from a black perspective, because I wanted to have an opportunity to correct the historical record. Much of what's been written about in social work history has been written from a Eurocentric perspective, and it all but excluded the contributions of Black scholars. So as I went through each era, I was able to insert the contributions of Black scholars that pretty much had been absent from the mainstream literature. So those were the reasons I wanted to create this broad context.
Yeah, well, that to me is one of the brilliant ways in which you approach this history. And that is, when we really look at Atlanta University and the schools within the Atlanta University Center, we can look at Spelman having been first organized in the basement of Friendship Baptist Church, Atlanta University having begun in a boxcar, a railroad boxcar following the Civil War. Morehouse having been founded at Springfield Baptist Church in Augusta, but then moving to this phenomenal center. And so, you know, that's the undergirding of this history that you so brilliantly provide. But you insert a number of direct quotes in the narrative from individuals who played a role in the school's history. What were the sources of data for obtaining such detailed information about the early years of the school described in the book? And are there benefits from using historical research as a study approach that you use to prepare the book?
Mhm. Yeah, I did. I was, I cited, I drew from a lot of many archival sources, and I was very fortunate. My affiliation with NYU gave me access to, really gave me worldwide access to libraries. And so I used, you know, I don't just use this kind of a personal personal observation that a very good colleague of mine said, where did you get how did you get that early history? They were not even creating digital, it wasn't even digitalized. And I said, well, yes, it was. You know, you just have to know where to go to look and find it. So I was able, for instance, I used the archives of Du Bois, Du Bois. His archives are at the Amherst in Massachusetts, and the letters, they're all, you know, they're all digitalized, so you have access to those. Whitney M. Young's, our subject tonight, his papers are at Columbia University, along with his wife, Margaret, who was quite a moving force in social work in her own right. So there were a number of sources, archival sources that I drew upon. And I also got some materials from the on-site archives at the school when I visited the campus. And I also got some qualitative data from the focus groups that I conducted with faculty and alumni. But the largest share of the archives, the documents that I drew upon were housed at you named them when you first started talking, that were housed at the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodworth Library, that holds the collected papers of all of the consortium schools, including Spelman and Morehouse. It also holds the, I think it's like, it's a custodialship of the Martin Luther King Jr. papers are at the library. So it is a treasure trove of information. And this is where I obtain most of my information. I also, and much of the early history of the book, I used Clarence, I always pronounce his name wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. Clarence Bacot, B-A-C-O.
Yeah, Clarence Bacot.
Bacot.
And he was the first African-American history professor recruited to Atlanta University in 1931 and he got his doctorate from University of Chicago.
You took the words right out of my mouth. And it was his book, and his papers are in the archives at the Library Center. And his paper,
Right.
The Story of Atlanta University, A Century of Service, 1865 to 1965, provided much of the information that's in the front part of the book on the emergence of the Atlanta University. So that was a source of there is such, and I had spoken with Dean Jones about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could, because these sources are so dispersed in various places, in various states, in various libraries, wouldn't it be great if you could have a central source where all of these sources could be brought together under the School of Social Work, where, you know, doctoral students would have easy access to those. So some of the benefits of historical research: first, it shines a light and this I think is very important, it shines a light on the persistence of social problems that are caused by systemic racism. And a part of my research in looking at what was happening with students when the school was first started, their master's thesis topics, police brutality, the Negro boy in Atlanta. And so they were very, very similar. They mirrored what are major topics today. And another issue why historical research, I think that the method that I used is important, because it just sharply demonstrates that what government does or does not do makes a real difference in the lives of people and the quality of lives of people. So if you look at the War on Poverty programs, you see a dramatic falling in child poverty rates. You see a much improvement in the quality of life of all Americans, especially of African Americans. And then if you compare that with the programs of the Nixon and Reagan administration, you see a sharp fall and you see a rise in poverty, and you see a rise in poverty. You also see a rise in social problems. So it allows us to look. It allows us to look and see what the impact of our interventions are and what impact they're having. It allows you to really measure the discrepancies. We talk a lot about racial disparities. It helps you look at them over a period of time and measure them, and also look at what's happening in the larger environment that's driving the direction that they're taking. So positive programs like the War on Poverty programs decreases poverty rates, and the punitive programs like those under new policies of new federalism results in a rising. But if you're smart, you'll begin to take a closer look at what that means. So there are many benefits of historical research.
Right. Well, can you really clarify then, what exactly does it mean to be an historically Black college and university, and what makes schools of social work in the HBCU network unique, and the Whitney M. Young Jr. School of Social Work especially unique as the first such HBCU school?
I think that's an excellent question, Johnny, because actually when I was teaching, even the faculty sometimes didn't know what an HBCU was. I think that because the coronavirus came along and brought the HBCUs more into the public view, and since the former president has claimed that he saved the HBCUs, and most people can remember that photograph when he brought all of the HBCUs into the Oval Office, and his special assistant, his legal advisor, was sitting barefoot on her sofa. Many people know what it is now, but many people did not know. But what it is what those institutions are is some of them were founded before the Civil War, and some were founded after the Civil War, and they were founded under different auspices. Some may have been founded under the Black Church. Actually, many were founded under the Black Church, and after the Civil War, many were founded by missionary groups and collaboration with the Freedmen's Bureau. And Freedmen's Bureau translates to the Bureau of Refugees, the Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Land. And Atlanta University was founded by the American Missionary Association, and later was joined by the Freedmen's Bureau. But today there are 101. At the end of the Civil War, I should back up and say that at the end of the Civil War, there were more than 3,000 schools established by the Freedmen's Bureau for Blacks. And over time, these schools became known as historically Black college and universities. Today, formally, There are 101 HBCUs located in 19 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the Higher Education Act of 1965 defines these institutions, defines them as institutions of higher learning established in the United States prior to 1964. That means prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1960s, prior to, whose principal mission was and is the education of Black Americans. And they are accredited by an officially recognized accrediting agency or in the process of securing accreditation. So that's the formal definition of an HBCUs. And there are, I should say that the state of Georgia has, the book tells you how many, talks about where the schools of social work are located, which schools of social, which of these schools have, which of these universities and colleges have accredited social work programs. There are 10 in the state of Georgia, but the point I'm trying to make here, not so well here, is that Atlanta University, Clark Atlanta University, Whitney M. Young School of Social Work is the only school of social work in the HBCUs in the South. Remember I said in the South, not the North, because Howard University is in the North and it has all three programs, but in the South that offers the social work degree at all levels, meaning the BSW, the MSW, and the Ph.D. Some schools have a PhD or a DSW. But what makes these schools unique? Does that make sense? What defines them? The schools before 1964, and they were established with a distinct purpose, which that means they were established in a place when it was legal to segregate, to practice racial segregation. And they serve largely African-American students, but not exclusively. And they are accredited or in the process of being accredited. So what's unique about schools of social work that are in these HBCUs is that to be an accredited school of social work, so to be an accredited social work program, the Council on Social Work Agency requires that the mission of the School of Social Work is anchored in that of the larger institution or the larger university or college in which it is housed. And so it just makes sense that because the larger universities, the universities and colleges that are HBCUs, all of their missions are linked to the betterment of the African-American community, and all have the common goal of preparing their students to go out to serve, to use their education in service to the Black community. So HBCU, schools of social work and HBCUs benefit from that, from being located in these. Their mission is very closely aligned with this kind of common unifying mission. So that's what makes these programs special, and what makes the Whitney M. Young School especially special is that it's the first school that benefit and has more experience because it has this long history of being anchored in one of the oldest, I'd say one of the oldest, in the oldest social work school here, oldest HBCU.
I'm interested, but Alma, I'm interested in when you first went to New York University and an alumnus of the Atlanta University School of Social Work. Were you generally viewed as someone who kind of earned your MSW on another planet because you were at the Atlanta University School of Social Work, and there was NYU with all of its money and recognition, and they publish all the time, and here you are showing up, and the students and the faculty have to take notice of your brilliance. I mean, how did that kind of play out during
Well,
those?
I hear the point that you're getting at, you're trying to make, but I wasn't as brilliant then when I came as I am now.
Well, none of us were. I mean,
But I have to tell you, what got me to NYU, you will be surprised to hear this, is that what got me to when I graduated, I continued, I resumed a relationship with the School of Social Work when I became more experienced. So when I was doing an outreach program in East and Central Harlem, I had a field instruction unit. And my field instruction unit was comprised of Smith students, NYU students, and Atlanta University students. So at that point in time, Atlanta University was still having these class and field institutes. So I would go back to participate in the class and field institutes because I was supervising their students here in New York. And actually that's how I met some of the faculty that like Naomi Ward, Howard Standback, they would come to see if I was doing a good job with their students. And that's how and of course I would go back and I would always stay, and I would stay in when I went back for the class and field, I would stay in contact with the faculty. But actually it's because I did a good job teaching Atlanta University students and NYU students that I got invited. The faculty at NYU. But now that's not to say that it was not, I did because I was imbued with a sense of purpose. I still carried with me
sure.
identity as a social worker, trained.
Right.
Professional identification was wedded to this perspective that I had learned at AU. I wasn't always an easy fit with NYU.
Right. Well, what's so interesting, when Velma and I attended the school, of course, we had block field work where we went away for 6 months and did our internships and collected data for the thesis. And I'm sure that Velma can verify this. Many times we were wondering, whether we could really carry the load, and we demonstrated that we could. But one of the things that always served as a kind of handle for us was the name Whitney Young. Certainly for me, somebody said, well, where's Atlanta University School of Social Work? What kind of school is that? Says, well, you've heard of Whitney Young. Oh, yes. Well, that became
name droppers.
Yeah. And then we had to carry it from there. But that began to open the door for me, frankly, while I was on field work in New York. That's when I actually had a chance to meet one of your, a person for whom you profiled and did a magnificent biography, Jim Thompson.
Oh boy.
I got to know Jimmy Thompson, and because he was, of course, the director of the Department of Welfare for the city of New York at the time. And so, there it was, there was the connection. You had people like Jimmy Thompson who knew about the school. And so you have that kind of connection throughout. And so I'm sure that provided somewhat of an undergirding also as to our credibility, because, essentially, being Black in many settings, you are held suspect.
I knew where you were getting at when I started to address that question. I also went on block placement. I did my placement in the VA hospital in Montrose, New York.
Oh, Montrose.
So I know that when people hear there's these myths about the HBCUs that you get an inferior education. and that you're not taught by, you know, the brightest and the best or so forth. But I have a problem of saving everything. Not problem, but I've saved all of my papers from the time that I was a student at
Wow.
Atlanta University, as well as my little purple notebook that has all of my notes in there,
Wow.
as well as my evaluations that were written by my field instructor while I was on block placement
Wow.
in New York City. And when I read them, I was not getting an inferior education.
Yeah.
And when I compare the papers that I wrote, that sometimes I got a B on, and I compare them to the papers that students are writing now, that they get A on, I say, well, you know, that speaks for itself. And when I look at evaluations, my evaluations like written on 4 pages of single-spaced onion skins, you know, because they always give you a copy.
Yeah.
You may have had the same thing. And
Yep.
students today, we check off. We don't even write their evaluations, we check off. So I saw what you were getting at, Johnny, but it was no means an inferior education, no,
Absolutely.
a very rigorous education. And I was really very fortunate to be mentored. And
Yep.
Dr. Dumpson was on my dissertation committee. And I wrote when I was doing my doctorate degree at the City University of New York. And if I thought the instructors at Atlanta were challenging, he was even more challenging.
Yeah, I'm sure of it. Well, would you really care to describe the role of Atlanta University and the role of its leadership? You've touched upon this, but the role of its leadership in shaping a need for social services. Basically, you've touched upon Forrester Washington. Do you care to delve more into that?
Okay. You know, I'm going to think about that for a minute. When we think about, I'm still here. Whoops. Okay, there they are. Here is the. I should have lost my train of thought for a minute because I do want to make this point. I'll make that point later. I'll go here. So here are some of the leaders from our past. I'm pointing as if I'm at a chalkboard here. I'm not. So all the way over to my left, is that correct?
Yep, here.
All the way over, oh great, there's a pointer. To my left, that is Edmund Asia Edmund, who founded Atlanta University.
Edmund Asa where?
Where, I'm sorry. Thank you, Johnny. Good to have a fact checker and a.
I read the book.
Okay. Well, what was distinguishing about him is that he was sent by the American Missionary Association, and it was he who established the motto of the school: find a way or make one. He was a Yale graduate, and that was a motto of Yale University. So he wanted to model this school, and he always knew this was going to be a school for Blacks, and it was not going to just provide rudimentary education. It was going to provide liberal arts education. And he established these 3 principles. One was they were always going to be co-educational. They were always going to strive for excellence in practice. And to hold to those principles, the Georgia State Board of the Georgia State Board of Education, I may not be using the correct title, but this was a board that was sent out to do site visits of all of the institution of higher education at the time. And we're talking now 1867, 1868, that they wanted him to not enroll white students. And he held firm that this was going to be a coeducational institution. So he gave up the stipend in order to hold on to his principles, in order to hold on to his commitment to providing Blacks with both vocational education and liberal arts education at a high standard, the standard of excellence. And I put next to him, that's Commissioner Oliver Otis Howard. And he worked with President Ware in establishing the university, but he was the first commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau. And he was really very instrumental in providing the kind of support to President Ware to keep the university, to put it in place and to keep it moving forward. And the person next to him is Horace Bumstead. And Horace Bumstead assumed the presidency of the university after the death of Edmund Asia Ware. And Horace Bumstead stands out for me because he had to keep the school afloat, didn't have the stipend anymore, so he had to keep the school afloat, doing more aggressive fundraising. But he also he was smart enough, he had the wisdom enough to bring the next person that we see, W.E.B. Du Bois, on board. And Du Bois, that little stinger, that's Du Bois, everybody recognizes him. He brought Du Bois on to teach and to establish a Department of Sociology. And he also, I don't even, Du Bois's contributions are legendary, you know, he's just an amazing person.
Right.
And next to him, he also put in place Phylon, which is still being published today. And in fact, Phylon is putting out a special edition to celebrate the school's 100th anniversary. So next to them is John Hope and his wife, Eugenia Burns Hope. And John Hope was president of both Morehouse and Atlanta University at one point. And he gave tremendous amount of support to getting getting the School of Social Work launched. He provided space, and he provided, I won't even go on to all of that, but it's described in the book. He provided an enormous amount of space, enormous amount of supports to get the school going. He was a remarkable educator and what they call one of the race men who was working at that time. I was sort of reluctant to put him up with his wife because she's always associated with her husband. But Eugenia Burns Hopes, you know, she was a force in her own right. And Eugenia Burns Hope was running the neighborhood unions. A lot of space is given to her in the book. She established the neighborhood unions, and she was developing a curriculum teaching volunteer workers in the Social Service Institute that was established at Morehouse before the school became actualized. So that's her. And I'll just go underneath her. Those are just the ladies the women who work with her in the neighborhood union. If we go over to the other side, My Story in Black and White, that's the book, that's the autobiography of Jesse O. Thomas. And Jesse O. Thomas is noted for giving his speech in 1920 at the 1920 conference of National Conference on Social Work on the need for a black school, the need for a training school for Black social workers. And that was his contribution to the school. And he also was a member of the inaugural inaugural faculty. And if we move up to that symbol for Morehouse, when the introductory banner came across, I saw a picture of Gary Moore, but I couldn't find a picture of Gary Moore. But that is to symbolize Gary Moore, because Gary Moore came to the school on loan. And that's the other thing that John Hope did. He sent Gary Moore on loan to the school to be the director when it was first inaugurated. And Gary Moore unfortunately passed away while he was on leave studying for his Ph.D. At what we now is Columbia University. I just put James Weldon Johnson beneath him. James Weldon Johnson was probably one of the most well-known alumni of the school, and we all know him best for his he did an awful lot. He's discussed quite a bit in the book as well, but he's best known for being the author of every event and under African-American auspices starts with the Negro anthem, and he is the one who coined that. And I would add that he was the first African-American visiting professor to teach at my school, NYU, not the School of Social Work, NYU University. And next to him is E. Franklin Frazier. E. Franklin Frazier, he assumed the directorship of the school after when Gary Moore passed away. He assumed the directorship, and he had very short tenure. He was kind of not very patient with being in sort of that racist environment. So, but he was the director after Gary Moore, and I think you can credit him with establishing a very strong research department at the university. He professionalized at the school. He professionalized the school, and my colleague Jerome Shealy has written extensively on E. Franklin Frazier, and there's also a section in the book that covers all of his contribution to the school. And then next to him is Forrester B. Washington. And Forrester B. Washington was the second director of the school. And Forrester B. Washington, I may or may not be correct on this, so you can fact check me on this. I think he may have been the longest serving director of the school. He served from 1924 to 1954, and he was really amazing. He continued that tradition of having a very strong research component. He also put in place a research department and courses that were specifically designed to teach skills, what we call skills and competencies and practice with the African-American community. And unfortunately, in order to maintain the school's accreditation, most of those were taken away from the curriculum in order to maintain the school's accreditation. But he had a very broad vision for the school. He put that forth in his publication, More Than a School, but a promotional agency. And he's given considerable space in the book. All of the directors are given considerable space in the book. And then everybody will recognize Whitney Young. I put him there with books. And Whitney Young was the first person to have the title of dean. And I kind of think about Whitney Young as being the transitional dean, because the deans that followed him, if I can put it this way, I hope it makes sense this way, that I sort of saw, when to use a metaphor from the President Obama used about the Joshua generation, that these deans all of these people were putting a school in place at a time of, Jim Crowism, soon after the end of the Civil War. And the deans following Whitney Young, they may not have known the struggles of antebellum, but they certainly knew the struggles of the civil rights movement. when President Obama used that phrase as Joshua generation, he was talking about people like himself who hadn't known the civil rights movement, but had benefited from the work of, iconic figures like John Lewis. But so the deans moving forward they did have that experience of the civil rights movement, but they didn't have all of this experience of when segregation and racism and Jim Crowism was very blatant in the South. And the North certainly was not excluded from that segregation. And I put Frankie Adams there. When Dean Young stepped down from the deanship, Frankie Adams served as acting dean. And I think of her as sort of like an embodiment. She taught me community organization. I remember her very well. She was like the prototype of what people consider the social worker. She wore hair in a bun and she wore gray suits and ties. Okay, so she's there for that. And I do just that after her we came Dean Jackson and so forth. They're all described in the book.
Right. Well, our time is nearly up as far as before we get to the Q&A, but you have some takeaway thoughts that you'd like to share. And you have a slide which is a part of your teaching. This is, we're looking at we're sitting in your classroom now, and these are the things that you basically end each class with are takeaway thoughts. And so would you care to share those thoughts?
Well, these are all thoughts that come from all of those people who were in some way that I just went through that played a very important role in the school in its early years and its middle years up to the kind of the civil rights years. And I think they still have relevance today. And I hope that if there's students in the room, and I hope that they are, that take these thoughts with you. The first one is from W.E.D. Du Bois. He said, when you master numbers, you will no longer be reading just the numbers. And when you master words, you would no longer be reading books, but you would be reading meanings. And that was like what I said earlier on, that I wanted to put this book in context, not just report the facts, but to encourage people to think critically about them. And E. Franklin Frazier said, education in the past has been too much inspiration and too little information. And social work over time, I think those are messages that are not only good for social workers, but for all educators. But we need to work harder on providing hard information. Young people, students need that very much these days. And Forrester B. Washington, he sort of had this continuing theme. Social workers practicing in the Black community need to know everything that every social worker needs to know and much more. And then of course, these, iconic words from Whitney Young. I think these may have been made, I think that the quotes that Jenny gave may have been made when he was president of NASW, president of National Association of Social Workers, but I think these may have come once when he was president of the executive director of the National Urban League. He said, you can holler, protest, march, picket, and demonstrate, but somebody must be able to sit. I can't see it all. There must be strategies, the researchers, the professionals to carry out the program. That's our role. And he was referring to social workers. And I also, I kind of alluded to the fact that there was a whole section on Virginia Burns Holt, but she said, she was a community organizer, and she said, did it ever occur to you? I probably said this myself a million times. Did you ever occur to you? Did you ever occur to you how hard it is to get this work started, how many years it takes, how many folks you have to get together to accomplish anything? So those are, for me, those are words that are timeless. And those are just some thoughts I want people to continue to think about after our session today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carten.
I think I talked too much on some of my things, but I get so excited about this book, I can't stop talking.
Well, there's so much information in this research, and I really urge everyone to really include this book in their permanent library. It's a phenomenal book, and you're to be commended for this.
Thank you for that, Johnny. Thank you for your thinking questions made me think even more. Thank you for that.
Well, Dean Jones, do you want to lead us into the Q&A? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I'd like to kind of refer to. One person asked, Tony Nelson, Dr. Carten, you mentioned, wouldn't it be great if we can centralize the archived documents on these amazing Black scholars in order for students, researchers to have access? Is it possible to do that? And if so, how do you think we should get started on that?
Well, I think it's very possible. I think the first thing you have to do is find some people who are interested in doing it with you. Mm-hmm. And then I want to develop a little proposal for funding. And then you want to get a team together who has some technical skills, which I don't have, and archival research, and then work on putting it in place. And Jenny, you and I had this conversation. You've gotten to know me over the time that I have been working on the book, but I'm great on the ideas, but I kind of fall short on implementing them. But I think I don't fall short. I can get them done too. I shouldn't say that. But we had talked about, you have that wonderful little space room in the school, mm-hmm. Where all of your archival documents are. That's where I sat when I was doing work at the school. Mm-hmm. Seems to be a space. Got some stuff there to get started with already. Mm-hmm. Seems to be, it's just linking up to all of these. You can link to Amherst for Du Bois's papers. You could link to Columbia for Whitney M. Young's papers, just to give you an example of that. And then just access so that people using that space could have access to those documents. But I think that's a very doable project. I don't know who Nelson is, but if Nelson's a doctoral student, it may be a doctoral project.
Great project. Well, I would ask Nelson to please reach out to the School of Social Work. We will put my contact information in the chat so that we can continue this dialogue. I think there might be some way to do some of that, because and I'd love to hear some of your ideas, Nelson, around how to make that happen, because we do have a space, and we have had many discussions about what to do with that space. And so this might be a great place to do that. Also, the library, the AUC library has a lot of archived documents on the School of Social Work, on the university. So that's always a good place to start. And we do have a social work librarian who could probably work with Nelson around retrieving some of these documents, and also work with us around how to begin to set up some of that.
I would think that would be great. Sometimes when I was working on doing the research, some archives is challenging. You can't get access to them for some reason. Mm-hmm. Some archives, if they will print the pages for you, they charge you for it. And even when I was working on Dr. Dumpson, the book with Dr. Dumpson's Fordham Library charged me to print out papers. So I'm thinking of a place where there's no charge and where you have access to, without trouble, having access to them and without cost, to make the process of research easier. Because I had to work pretty hard in going around finding out where these documents were located first, getting access to, and that was easier for me to do. But if they were not, in digital format, how to get my eyes on them.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm putting my email address in the chat, and so we can certainly continue this conversation.
Excellent.
Nelson, about how to make this happen. There's a comment in the chat, not a question, but I would like to read it from Laura Hester, Piers Hester. Thank you both for a wonderful presentation and questions. Alma, I'd like to add a quote from Du Bois that I use and paraphrase often. The purpose of higher education is to prepare you for not only the work that society, the world wants done, but also for the work that society/world ought to want to have done, really can translate to social justice work needed so urgently today. Blessings to all. And I see another question that just popped up by Laura. How do we apply? I'm sorry, this is not Laura, this is Larice Harvey. How do we apply what we learn about discrimination to help formerly incarcerated leaders today?
Is that I think that that's not an area of expertise for me. So being a social worker that abides by the code of ethics, I stay within the area of my competencies, but what's going on in terms of incarcerated. There's so many policies going on in terms of incarceration. President Obama has a program. The book does talk about that act that got passed under Clinton administration, that led to mass incarceration. But this is not an area for me, but I know that is something that's on the agenda now. And the person who asked that question, the individual who asked that question, can simply Google it. You'll find I'm sure tons of things on programs that are going on to kind of right what turned out to be an enormous wrong that had a detrimental impact on the African-American community.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I'd like to add to that, there's a reality to mass incarceration. We are the low-hanging fruit, and we have really fed into an economic system that there is such a system in which there is such a vested interest in making money that it's going to require something more than an approach through social work or through the courts, very honestly. It's going to, in my view, require massive demonstrations, because when we really look at mass incarceration, let's look at it. You have, let's just start with the courts. Let's start with the lawyers. Let's start with the judges. Let's start with the bailiffs. Let's start with the jailers. Let's start with the food service people who have contracts. I've many times cited, just imagine the company that has the toilet paper contract with the prisons. We're talking about a massive enterprise. And this is not something that can be addressed politely, just as racism generally cannot be addressed politely. And this, frankly, was one of the things of which Whitney Young was noted, that he recognized at the time of the the 1960 student movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
That,
I would add to that, Johnny.
there were some things that could be felt very strongly that it's important that those student demonstrations shake up the system and force some kind of reckoning. And mass incarceration is one such thing. So it's such an integral part of the American economy. I mean, police departments throughout this country thrive on this low-hanging fruit, and there we are. So we're dealing with something that requires more than just an academic discussion.
Yeah.
That's one,
I
in my
agree.
view, you got to go to the streets with.
I think that the Biden administration has put an end to new construction of prisons that are, they're done like a contractual basis. But if you look at, and I don't want to keep referring back to the book, but that is my reference. But if you look back in the book, this all started after Reconstruction. This all started after the end of slavery, where you used, and I don't have to use contract workers to be a labor supply, but this is all, it all has a historical root. And I think, Johnny, I think you would agree that what Whitney Young would say, and it was sort of captured in that last quote, was that you can holler and you can march as much as you please, but you also need to be very strategic about that, what you're doing.
Right.
I would say that it's important, if that is an area, and then you're correct. I mean, it's an industry. It's not, there's no rehabilitation going on. There's an industry, and it houses largely poor Black and white men, but largely Black men. And it's also moving towards incarcerating women, largely Black women. And when you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate an entire family. So I'm saying all this to say that, in keeping with the point of view of Whitney Young, is that it requires people, if that is an issue that you're interested in, it requires you to get yourself ready for it, to learn the roots of it, to learn what causes it, and follow the money, like you said, but you also have you have to have a clearly devised strategy for doing that. And that is what Whitney M. Young encouraged us always to do. So I'm agreeing with you, but I'm just adding that point. And, I think the book talks about that, the 13, 14, 15, that, makes it legal to incarcerate people.
Well, that's it's documented very well in the book called Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman. But also, when I was my block fieldwork assignment was with the Kings County Court Probation Department in Brooklyn, and I actually did my thesis on the treatment of looked at for a great many years. And I am thoroughly convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that cannot be addressed, frankly, even through, especially through politicians, because bear in mind, it was Bill Clinton who really led to it, but we're getting off the topic. But
it's important. It's all relevant. It's all relevant. It's all hooked together. That's why I keep talking about the book. That's why I took that broad, it's all hooked together. You can't think about one piece. You're talking about a huge piece. And I started the book talking about slavery, remember?
Yeah.
Everything bounces off of that. Slavery,
right.
That just keeps passing itself on into institutional racism. It just keeps passing itself on in a different form.
Right.
Dean Jones, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, everybody. This is Sam Burson, VP of Advancement at Clark Atlanta University.
Hi,
And you
Sam.
can't, I was so excited. I was busy, but I had to join this. And every time Dr. Alma Carten starts talking about it, I become engulfed. And Johnny Parham, I was supposed to leave. Now I'm caught up in it. And hello, Ms. Banks. Hope you're doing well tonight. But I had a question that I wanted to pose regarding social work as a whole. And I know there have been challenges and struggles in terms of getting the whole field developed. Now, as it relates to social work today, how is the field viewed today, and how do we get students interested in the field? Can you all take a stab at that for me?
May I take a stab at it?
Absolutely.
I'm going to take
I'll
a stab.
follow up for you.
I can follow. Deans will give me, Deans can do
Oh,
first.
absolutely. Go right ahead.
So I would say, and Jenny, you probably picked this up, there's a undercurrent theme in the book that social work students are, and not only social work students, but social work practitioners are becoming more interested in micro MICRO practice, meaning psychotherapy that's given to the worried rich who are able to pay for these services. You see more and more social workers moving into private practice. So I think, Sam, the question would be, and this is what I tried to do with this book, is how do you rekindle the interest of social workers and social work students, incoming students, in the public mission of social work? So that's what I think is the challenge. And I think, Jenny, you also alluded to that in some of the narrative, the quotes you were giving from Whitney M. Young. How do we get social workers to feel that sense of righteous indignation? This is not right. This is wrong. This shouldn't be. This is not America. So I think I would just differ. They're coming in. I mean, enrollment is up at my school, which hasn't been impacted at my school, which offers one concentration in clinical practice. But I think the challenge is, how do you get social workers, how do you get the field recommitted to the public mission of social work? And I'm going to add, because I am optimistic and social work is an optimistic profession, that we do see that happening with the coronavirus and with the.
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask you, what do you think the role is going to be post-COVID?
Well, they got to come back in with that. I mean, you see social workers beginning to kind of come in on that issue.
Dean Jones?
I hear you.
I agree with everything that Alma just stated. Somewhere along the way, our profession moved into this psychotherapy, therapeutic way of doing, and the work that Mr. Young talks about, that Alma just mentioned, being out there in the communities and in the trenches and fighting for learning about those issues that impact families at the lower level here, because that's what's really important. That's the mission, family well-being and helping people having food to eat, a place to live, their needs being met, having equitable pay for the work they do. All of those things are important, but we shifted somewhere along the way. But I think where we are today, with all of the racial injustice that's happening, with all of the post-COVID work that's needed to be done, all of this work is going to have to be done within the community. And I think this profession has a really strong opportunity at getting back into the community to help build families, help train families to build themselves up to be able to advocate for these issues and take care of themselves. And really, this is all about that whole, I kind of liken it to this whole civic participation, not just teaching people about voting, but the whole civic participation around engagement, helping people understand how really what they need to do to help take care of themselves and their families. And so I just see that as being a really, really big issue.
And
Because-
Dean Jones, may I pose a question specifically to Johnny Parham? Now, how do you get more men involved in the field?
Well, I guess what we really have to do, Sam, is even look at the pipeline. That's one of the challenges that we have with regard to higher education overall.
That's true.
The pipeline is really undermining the progression of African American men. And in fact, when you look at graduate and professional schools, women are outnumbering men in graduate and professional education today. So, you know, there's something that's happening out here that's that needs to be addressed. I mean, you're raising some very, very relevant issues here, Sam, and that's one that, frankly, put in a plug for the Executive Leadership
Yes.
Institute that we're seeking to address
That's what he was looking
on
for.
the campus of Clark Atlanta, because essentially what we're concerned with is not just male leadership of HBCUs, but we're looking at quality leadership of HBCUs. And so that's where we're in the process of developing a certification program for future leaders of HBCUs. But during the course of that, we still have to look at the pipeline. What are the existing sources from which we're recruiting leadership for HBCUs?
If I could
That's an issue that really has to be kind of
Right, 'cause,
addressed.
yeah,
There's a great deal of
something's
activity.
happening. Even the ratio of males to female is 75-25 here
Yeah.
at CAU. Go ahead, Dr. Carten. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I think that issue may be tied also to this increasing interest in clinical social work. Men who come into social work, they're going to be more interested in administration, policy, government work, and so forth. They want to do that broad-based kind of work. So I think we have a hard time getting men to go into go into mental health services. But I think you would find that it's also a reflection of that track where we're overemphasizing clinical work, direct service work, as opposed to administration, policy work. And I think if we achieve more of a balance, we could encourage more males to come into the field. And I also think that we also have to correct some of the myths about social work. The males, when they do come into the field, they tend to earn more salaries at a higher rate than women. And I keep going to the book, but there's a study completed on the graduates of Atlanta University. I think it was completed by Clarence Coleman. I think I'm getting the name right. But even then, I think the study was done in like the 1940s or so, that males graduating from the same schools, same jobs were receiving a higher salary than women. So there are a lot of things that we can do internally to kind of get more men to come into the field.
Right. And when Dean Jones and I talk in the morning when I'm en route to campus sometimes, and we're talking about getting more, especially male involved in the field of social work, because traditionally when I was a kid involved of social work, as I stated to her, I thought somebody came by to take the kids from the parents and,
well, they're
and,
still thinking that, Sam.
And so, but what I'm saying, but I'm saying, how would you, if you had to pick a phrase, how would you define social work today? How would you define that?
I would have added my son's a social worker.
Okay.
Wonderful.
SW social worker.
That's great. But how would you define it if you had a couple of words? How would you define it?
You can't define social work.
And that's what I'm saying. It's broader than, it's very broad.
You could get 15 million definitions from 15 different people about social workers is. And when I told my father I was going to study social work in graduate school, he said, you got to go to graduate school to learn how to help people. I'm not willing to tackle that question about how do you define social work.
No, and Dr. Carten, I see Ms. Velma Banks is on the line. Ms. Banks, can you unmute yourself? But I know when you were, how was it perceived when you were coming along in the field in terms of social work?
Well, I think the one thing that was said about block placement, of course, you know, we could not be trained in New York, in the state of Georgia, because of segregation.
Okay.
So my first introduction to working in the school was in the New York State Training School for Girls in upstate New York. That's where I started my training. And then coming into New York City, where I worked in every borough as a practitioner, administrator, and also an educator. So it was a very strange way of helping people to find themselves. So my concern really has always been to redirect and redefine the diagnosis of a people, then you can be better at prognosing. And that has a lot to do with the history of slavery and the mindset for those workers who had to go in communities and they were not really ready to address the issues that we face. So the one thing I would say is that working in one of the downtown social work agencies, where we used to have conferences to determine how foster parents were working with their children. Mm-hmm. And the conversation was, how do you get answers? And since it was an all-white staff at the time, it was just a few African Americans. One thing that I would say is, I asked this foster mother 3 times what she would do on behalf of the young person who was causing her some difficulty, and there was not an answer. And finally, this elderly African-American foster mother said, I pray. Okay. When she said, I pray, that was a deliverance, but it was not picked up by anybody around the table because there was only maybe 1 or 2 African-Americans there. And I was not as convinced then as I am now. That's our history. And that's one way of addressing the social work aspect culturally and with God consciousness. And I think that would be a movement in the right direction.
Well, that's
kind of saved myself from being cavalier on that last question. Let me just say, and I would say this sometimes to my students, Sam, is that social work, when we use the word social, it refers to people and interaction. Okay. It refers to society. It refers to groups of people. And when you use the word work, it means changing something. And when you work on something, you're changing it for the better. And I would sort of use that for my students as we were getting more closer and closer to becoming psychotherapists. Psychotherapy equals treatment, and psycho equals the individual, and therapy implies pathology. So social work is based on the assumption of health. And I think that's embedded in the Afrocentric perspective, Jenny. Mm-hmm. It's based on health and building on the strengths and the resilience of people. And going back to that old adage, as I was doing research on the book, I got kind of hooked into that word, the betterment of society. Okay. That's what social work is about. It's social, it's about people, and it's about work. Yeah. It's changing for the betterment of society.
Yeah. I always say to folks when they ask me that question, this is a multifaceted profession that trains you with skills and knowledge that allows you to really do all of the things that Alma just talked about, work with individuals, work with communities, organizations, and it's all based on looking at people in their environment. And I translate that because I've done macro work for so many years. You know, organizations, we have to look at organizations in their environment as well. If you want to make change in an organization, you got to understand that environment, the culture, and all of the actors that's involved. So we have to help the public understand that this is not a profession that's only geared to psychotherapy. That you can do so many other things with this degree. And I like to tell the story, Sam. I have a flyer on my door in my office that I got from NASW many years ago. It's titled, "You'll Need a Social Worker When ... There's about 50 things listed there that tells you clearly when you will need our presence that people don't even think about. So I think it's an invaluable profession. I don't think we're going anywhere. As Alma mentioned, enrollment is up at NYU. Our enrollment at CAU has not dipped when it comes to the profession of social work, the School of Social Work. We actually still have to put people on waiting lists or waive them out for the next year. It's not going anywhere. And I think that we're going to be needed more than ever as we continue on the path that as this country continues on the path around white supremacy, injustice, racial injustice, income inequity, voting participation. But I mean, all of those issues that we see in front of us now, we're going to need social workers on the front line to help move us through that.
And you guys know, just as the last Zoom session we had, we were supposed to stop at a certain time, but we're holding our audience because there are many questions there. And so that's why I wanted to pop in to ask a couple of questions. And in terms of Whitney Young, Dr. Carten, when he was in the space, are you aware of his most difficult time or a challenge he may have had that he had to overcome while he was in the space?
Challenges that he had to overcome. Again, Sam, I'm going to refer back to the book.
It's about the book, yes.
Okay, yeah, it's about it's about the book. The book covers a lot. An entire chapter is devoted to him, and this is just my thought. I can call this my opinion, just based on what I know about doing the research about him, talking with his daughter, Marcia, who I was able to develop a very strong relationship with, and reading Whitney Young's own book, the books that he published himself, is that he was very restless. You know, he was a man always in a state of becoming. I think when he came to when he left Minnesota to come to the school, that was the becoming point, where he was always feeling this kind of tension. When he came to the deanship, I don't think he was planning on staying there forever. He was still feeling a kind of tension. He was involved with, and Johnny knows this, he was involved with a group of young professional Black men in the in the city of Atlanta community. He published a paper that the students that you work with, Johnny, on an appeal for human rights, used that document. And
it was called a second look at Atlanta.
A second look at Atlanta, but he was always
and that's the source.
And a sense of restlessness.
That was the source for the appeal for human rights.
Appeal to practice. Yeah, that's what I was saying. And I think when he left when he died as a result of accidental drowning, he was very young. He was just 54 years old. He was at the midlife, so to speak. I think he was just about ready to move on from the Urban League as well. So for me, I think, Sam, I think he may have been in an ongoing, and maybe that's what makes for great leaders. He was feeling an ongoing sense of restlessness and never being satisfied where he was. There was always more work to be done, a new place to be.
Right.
So in that regard, I would say that was an ongoing sense of trouble for him that made him the kind of leader he was. And when you read the book, you see he grew up in a very privileged environment. You know, I won't go into all of that, but that would be my kind of response to you, Sam. But I think he was always feeling a sense of being troubled, a sense of restlessness about there was more work to do, achieving. And I was sort of, when you read, I think it was in one of his books, I got two of his books, and they're all frayed now. We should make sure that those books are in, you know, they're reissued, republished, so they're becoming fresh. But he writes in a very kind of, it almost reminds me of W.E.B. Du Bois. He writes in this kind of sickly. He's kind of going on. He's kind of asking us to join with him in a way of thinking about making it possible for all people to fully achieve their self-actualization. So I think he was living in a higher plane than the rest of us were. He was always challenging where he was and continuing to move forward, if that makes sense.
It does. And thank you for all of you for your answers. And Dean Jones, we have been given the wind down from our producer, Dr. Mary Hooper. So if you want to close us out.
Well,
Okay.
it's Velma. I think Velma
I'm
has
sorry.
some words.
Okay, that's what I'm
Velma?
sorry.
I would say if all of us could clap our hands and be heard, it would be so wonderful. We're in different places, but I know we've all been so blessed
That's right. Thank you.
to get the remarks about this mighty book. And I don't know that we really spoke about it so strongly. It says, find a way or make one. And that's what we've been listening to tonight, how to find a way and make one. And certainly the documentary history of Clark Atlanta University Whitney M. Young School of Social Work was so well presented from 1920 to 2020. So this is so wonderful for the blending of the world community of social workers and the Whitney M. Young Junior School of Social Work to see that something can keep moving together for our future. So pleased of some of the people I know who've come who are with us tonight. I think that Elaine Congress from Fordham University, I think she said she would be here. And
Right.
I think that C. Virginia Fields, I'm sure is here, and there are others who represent the profession have done so much to make a difference in it. And one of the things that we can look forward to is those who are interested, Google up Dr. Carten. You'll find so much about her accomplishments. My goodness, my goodness. If you want to hear more about Whitney Young, certainly his 10-point domestic Marshall Plan is what we use a lot in the world community of social.
Oh, yeah.
And also futuristically, what are we going to do about children and young people in the pipeline to get them into many schools, but certainly into the Whitney Young School of Social Work? We want to make sure that they're financed appropriately and that they can move forward. So the thank you tonight is Whitney's thank you for all of us who come together to learn about the school, people in it, the alumni who was very wonderful tonight, Sister Alma and Brother Johnny and Sister Velma. We are so great. We're so pleased, rather, to be alumnus of this school. So as I move to just say these words that Whitney said as a part of his support in the March on Washington, I opened up one of his comments about being with the Association of the Welfare Conference. As I prepare to turn this over to Dr. Jones, I'd like to say that Whitney Young said, the hour is late, the gap is widening. The rumble of the drums of discontent resounding throughout the land are heard in all parts of the world. So this is what he said for the March on Washington in 1963, that we are moving forward, the time is right. And we're so thankful that all who come, so much more we could say, but you've heard a lot of it. And I hope you got a takeaway that you can use in your own futuristic work. So thank you all. And Dean Jones, you can give us what you would have us know.
Thank you very much, Velma. And I want to say to the panelists, thank you for a stimulating conversation about the book. Mr. Palm, Dr. Carten, this was excellent. And I just love the pictorial that you presented as you talked about the history of the book and the people that was involved. Absolutely wonderful. I do want to say to our attendees, thank you for being a part of this discussion tonight. Your comments in the chat were very well received. We always wish there was more time to talk more about this, but as you know, this is winding down in a very few minutes. I want to also let you know that the book is posted on the flyer right before us. On the PowerPoint that's before us. There's a link where you can purchase the book. Encourage you to read it if you haven't had a chance to buy it and read it. Please do. It's a wonderful read. I kind of sat down on a Friday evening. Now, my plan was to just kind of skim through the book. When I knew anything, I was halfway through it, and I got up Saturday morning and finished it. Great book. I would encourage you to purchase it. And I also just want to say to all of our participants tonight that we're always grateful for your commitment to donate proceeds to the School of Social Work. All proceeds from the book, or a portion of the proceeds from the book, will go to the school. And we would also ask you to please give to support the school's 100 celebration. Last October, October 4th, 2020, the school turned 100 years old. Our plan for a huge celebratory event for October were redirected due to COVID. And we did some virtual pieces, but we're planning for an all-out celebration in October 2021 if COVID gets out of our way. So thank you again. And
excuse Dean Jones, tell everybody to buy 2 copies, but buy one for a friend. Okay.
You heard it from Mr. Burston. Buy 2 copies, one for yourself and one for a friend. And I've actually bought 11 copies of the book.
Okay, great.
And shared them with others. So follow my lead, please.
Right.
And I'm sure that we'll all want it to be in any library, in any school. And I just want to take this quick moment back to thank all of the World Community of Social Workers who I do not see, but I know you're here tonight. So I'm so glad that you are.
Okay. Thank you all again. Our host,
All right.
pardon?
Dr. Alma, did you have anything else to say?
No, thank you all. This was it was an honor for me. I really, I just, sometimes I talk too much because I just got so involved.
She gets excited, doesn't she?
I get excited.
I think when one puts the amount of work and time and energy into writing, producing a product like this, it's something to be excited about. I see how you could go on and on about it. This is really big. This is very big. The world knows about Whitney M. Young Jr., but you helped the world to know about Whitney M. Young Jr. in the context of Atlanta University School of Social Work, now Whitney M. Young Jr. School of Social Work. And I think that's fantastic.
And Dean Jones, we have a special for tonight for the your viewing audience to see. Dr. Hooper is going to play something very special.
Bring with the harmony.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Hooper. Thank you, Maria Laughlin, and thank you, Myra Walker. Wasn't that simply wonderful?